The note trembled between Amina Duarte's fingers as she slid it beneath the napkin, her heart pounding so hard she thought the entire restaurant could hear it. She had just committed the most dangerous act of her 27 years, trusting a stranger with the truth that could destroy her brother's last chance at survival. The man sitting in the corner booth, the worst table in Southern Roots, reserved for customers deemed unworthy by appearance alone, looked up at her with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to pierce through the carefully constructed walls she'd built around her fear. He wore faded jeans and a simple cotton shirt, his hands calloused in a way that suggested work, not privilege. But there was something in his posture, something in the way he observed everything with silent precision, that made her gamble everything on a desperate hope. "Just water for now," he said softly, his Arabic accent barely noticeable beneath careful English. "Thank you," Amina nodded, her professional smile masking the terror clawing at her throat. Behind the gleaming bar, Hassan Al-Khoury, the manager who ruled this restaurant like a petty dictator, watched her with narrowed eyes, his hand resting possessively on the shoulder of a young hostess who looked like she wanted to disappear. Hassan wore expensive cologne and Italian leather shoes purchased with money stolen from tips, from altered receipts, from the pockets of employees who couldn't afford to lose a single shift, from the pockets of people exactly like Amina. She turned away before her expression could betray her, moving between tables with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to be invisible. The restaurant hummed with evening conversation, businessmen discussing oil contracts, tourists marveling at the fusion of American Southern cuisine and Omani hospitality, wealthy locals treating their mistresses to meals that cost more than Amina earned in a week. Nobody noticed the woman in the simple black uniform refilling water glasses. Nobody ever did, except, perhaps, the stranger in the corner. Sheikh Amir bin Rashad Al Nuhail watched the server disappear into the kitchen, the folded paper burning like a coal against his palm. He had come to Southern Roots on impulse, driven by exhaustion with the suffocating world of royal protocols and the nagging suspicion that his charitable foundation's quarterly reports were too perfect, too polished, too conveniently aligned with what he wanted to hear. For once, he'd wanted to see reality without the filter of bowing assistants and carefully rehearsed presentations. So he dressed like a construction worker, clothes borrowed from his driver, a baseball cap pulled low, and walked through the front door, expecting to be treated like any other customer. What he got instead was a masterclass in casual cruelty. Hassan had looked him up and down with barely concealed contempt, his smile a weapon of exclusion, before gesturing dismissively toward the corner table squeezed between the kitchen door and a service station. "We're very busy tonight," Hassan had said, though at least 6 better tables sat empty. "This is all we have available." Amir had simply nodded and sat down, cataloging every detail. The way Hassan's attention immediately shifted to a German couple in designer clothes, the lavish treatment they received, the bottle of expensive wine that appeared without being ordered. He'd built this place to honor cultural exchange and provide opportunity. Instead, it had become just another monument to the class divisions he claimed to oppose. Then came the woman with sad eyes and steady hands, and the note that changed everything. He unfolded it carefully beneath the table, reading words that made his blood run cold. "The manager is stealing. Money, tips, everything. He changes the system prices. We have proof, but he threatened my brother in the hospital. If you know someone important, please help us. We are afraid." Amir's jaw tightened. This wasn't just theft. This was extortion. terror. The systematic abuse of people who had no recourse, no protection, no voice loud enough to be heard over the clinking of wine glasses and the praise of tourists enjoying their authentic experience. He looked up, searching for the woman who'd taken such a catastrophic risk. She stood near the kitchen, pretending to organize menus, but her shoulders were rigid with tension. Hassan approached her, and Amir saw her body language shift, a subtle withdrawal, a careful neutrality that spoke of practiced survival. The manager leaned close, saying something that made her nod quickly, her eyes dropping to the floor, when Hassan's hand brushed her lower back, in a gesture that lingered just a moment too long. Amir's fingers curled into fists beneath the table. Hassan walked away laughing, and the woman, whose name he didn't yet know, released a breath that looked like it hurt. She caught Amir watching, and her eyes widened with sudden fear, as if she'd only just realized the magnitude of what she'd done. But Amir held her gaze and gave a single, deliberate nod, a promise without words: "I will help you." Over the next 3 days, Sheikh Amir bin Rashad did something he'd never done before. He became invisible by choice. He returned to southern roots as a cable technician, complete with a work van and tool belt borrowed from the palace maintenance team. He sat in different corners, ate different meals, watched Hassan's operation with the focus of a man trained since childhood to spot weakness in political adversaries. What he saw made him ashamed. The manager intercepted cash tips, pocketing them before servers ever saw them. He altered digital receipts, inflating prices and skimming the difference. He yelled at employees in rapid Arabic, assuming foreigners wouldn't understand, using insults that would have gotten him expelled from any decent establishment. But worse than the theft was the fear. Staff members moved like deer in hunting season, always aware of where Hassan stood, always calculating safe routes through the dining room. The woman who'd given him the note, he learned her name was Amina, bore the worst of it. Hassan watched her constantly, found fault with everything she did, assigned her the hardest shifts and the worst sections. Yet she never complained, never argued. She simply endured with a dignity that reminded Amir of his own mother, who died when he was 12, leaving behind a legacy of quiet strength that no amount of royal blood could replicate. On the 4th night, Amir came as himself, or rather, as the working-class version of himself he'd created. He wore the same faded jeans and worn shirt, asked for the corner table, and waited until Amina's shift was winding down. When she brought his check, he spoke softly in English. "I need to know everything. Not here. After your shift." Amina's hand shook slightly as she set down the leather folder. "I don't know you. You trusted me once. Trust me again, please." She studied him for a long moment. This man who'd returned again and again to a restaurant most people wouldn't visit twice, who sat in the worst seats without complaint, who watched everything with eyes that missed nothing. Finally, she nodded once, sharply. "There's a bakery 2 blocks west, 15 minutes after closing." The bakery was called Sunrise, though night had long since fallen when Amir arrived. The owner, an elderly Omani woman who knew Amina from the neighborhood, let them sit in a corner booth near the back, bringing mint tea without being asked. Amina wrapped her hands around the warm glass as if she were cold, though the night was heavy with desert heat. "My brother's name is Ferris," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's 15, leukemia. We came here from Houston because the treatment was supposed to be cheaper, and my mother's cousin had connections to get me work. But Mom died last year, heart attack, and now it's just me and Ferris. Hassan knows this. He knows I can't lose this job. He knows I can't go to the police." "Why not?" Amir asked. though he already suspected the answer. Because I'm foreign, because I'm nobody, because Hassan has connections, real ones, not just family friends, and he's made it very clear what happens to people who cause problems. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, showing him a photograph that made Amir's stomach turn. It showed Faris in his hospital bed, asleep, vulnerable, with a timestamp from 3 days ago. He sent me this, said it would be a shame if my brother had an accident, if his medication got mixed up, if something went wrong. The tea sat untouched between them as Amina explained the scope of Hassan's operation. It wasn't just theft, it was organized crime, hiding behind the veneer of a cultural restaurant. Hassan brought men in after hours, men with expensive cars and dead eyes, who spoke about shipments and territories in languages Amina didn't fully understand, but recognized as criminal. She'd tried to document everything, altered receipts, skimmed tips, the mysterious meetings. She had photos, recordings made on her phone when Hassan thought she was just another ignorant cleaner. But every piece of evidence was also another risk, another reason for Hassan to eliminate the problem she represented. "Why me?" Amir asked quietly. "Why trust a stranger?" Amina met his eyes with a frankness that cut through all pretense. "Because you came back. Because you sat in that terrible corner and didn't demand a better table. Because when Hassan yelled at the dishwasher, called him a stupid Pakistani dog, I saw your face. You looked angry, really angry. Not everyone notices. Not everyone cares." The weight of her words settled over Amir like a physical burden. She'd chosen him not because of power he hadn't revealed, but because of a humanity she'd recognized in a moment when he thought no one was watching. It was the most humbling compliment he'd ever received. "I'll help you," he said, "but I need all the evidence, everything you have. Can you get it?" "It's at my apartment, hidden." She hesitated. "But Hassan's been watching me. If I do anything unusual, then we do it together. Tomorrow, you leave work normally, I'll meet you 2 blocks away. We'll get the evidence and bring it to someone who can act." "Who?" Amina's voice was sharp with skepticism. "Who exactly do you know that Hassan can't touch?" Amir almost told her then, almost revealed that he was the heir to the emirate, that Hassan worked for a foundation Amir himself had created, that with one phone call he could have the manager arrested and every stolen rial returned. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the way she looked at him, not as a title or a bank account, but as a person who'd chosen to see injustice and respond. Perhaps it was the understanding that once she knew the truth, everything between them would change. The honesty would become performance. The trust would become obligation. So instead, he said simply, "Someone who cares about what's right. Meet me tomorrow at 3. The blue Honda near the pharmacy." Amina wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this quiet man with careful eyes could somehow protect her brother and expose Hassan's crimes without destroying what little stability she'd managed to build. But belief was a luxury she'd learned not to afford. The next afternoon, she left Southern Roots exactly on schedule, her movements deliberately casual, despite the anxiety coiling in her stomach. She walked her usual route toward the bus stop, then ducked into a fabric store and exited through the back entrance, emerging 2 blocks away where a blue Honda waited with its engine running. Amir was behind the wheel, dressed like a rideshare driver, completely unremarkable in the afternoon traffic. "Get in quickly," he said. And she did, pulling her hijab forward to shadow her face. They drove through Muscat's winding streets, Amir checking mirrors with professional paranoia that made Amina wonder, not for the first time, exactly who this man was. He spoke like someone educated, moved like someone trained, and had an air of contained authority that didn't match his borrowed clothes. But she'd learned not to question gifts that appeared in desperate times. She'd learned to take help where she could find it and worry about the cost later. Her apartment was in a building that had seen better decades. Concrete walls stained with rust and time. Laundry hanging from every balcony like flags of surrender. Amir parked 3 blocks away, and they approached on foot, Amina's keys already in her hand. The building's lobby smelled of cooking spices and mildew. The elevator broken as usual. They climbed 4 flights of stairs in tense silence. Inside, the apartment was small but immaculately clean. The kind of clean that comes from having almost nothing to maintain. Photos of Ferris covered one wall. School pictures, soccer games, a recent shot where his smile was brave, but his eyes were tired. Medical bills were stacked neatly on a second-hand desk. A small Quran sat on a bookshelf next to an English translation. Both covers worn from use. "The evidence is in here," Amina said, pulling a shoebox from beneath her mattress. Inside were printed receipts, USB drives, a small notebook filled with dates and transactions. "I kept copies of everything I could access. The recordings are on." The sound of car doors slamming made them both freeze. Amir moved to the window, his body language shifting from cautious to alert in an instant. 3 black SUVs had pulled up outside the building, doors opening to reveal men in expensive casual wear, the kind of clothes that criminals wore when they wanted to blend in but couldn't quite hide the violence in their posture. Hassan emerged from the lead vehicle, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing sharply at the building entrance. "He knows," Amina whispered, her voice hollow with terror. "He knows I'm here. He knows how long to the back exit," Amir asked, his voice suddenly sharp with command. "There isn't one. Only the fire escape, but it goes to an alley that's good enough. Get the evidence, all of it, now." While Amina frantically gathered the shoebox and a laptop, Amir pulled out his phone and made a call that changed everything. His voice dropped into formal Arabic, the dialect of the royal court, and Amina heard words that made no sense. "Sheikh, security detail, immediate extraction." She turned to stare at him, the shoebox slipping from suddenly numb fingers. "What did you just say?" Amir met her eyes, and in his gaze, she saw apology and resignation. "My name is Amir bin Rashad Al Nuhail. I'm the heir to this emirate. Southern Roots is part of my foundation, and I'm so sorry I didn't tell you sooner." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Amina's feet. The man she'd trusted, the ordinary man who'd sat in a corner booth and listened to her desperation, was the Sheikh himself, the face on billboards and news broadcasts, the untouchable royal whose charitable work was celebrated across the Gulf. She'd given a prince a note asking for help finding someone important. The absurdity would have been funny if she wasn't about to be killed. "You lied to me," she said, her voice shaking with fury and betrayal. "You let me think. I let you trust me without obligation, without the performance everyone puts on for royalty. I wanted to see the truth, Amina, and you showed me." Footsteps thundered up the stairwell. Hassan's voice echoed through the building, yelling her name with proprietary rage. Amir grabbed the laptop and evidence box, pulling Amina toward the window. "We don't have time for this conversation. Move, now." They climbed onto the fire escape as the apartment door exploded inward, Hassan and 3 men spilling into the tiny space. The metal fire escape groaned under their weight as they descended, rust flaking away beneath scrambling feet. Hassan appeared at the window above, his face purple with rage, screaming threats that bounced off concrete walls and shattered windows. Amina's hands shook so badly, She nearly dropped the shoebox, but Amir caught it, tucking it under one arm while keeping his other hand on her elbow, steadying her descent. They hit the alley running, cutting through a maze of back streets that Amina knew from months of walking home late at night when she couldn't afford bus fare. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Amir's security detail was coming, but so were Hassan's reinforcements. Black SUVs appearing at alley entrances, cutting off escape routes. They ducked through a laundry yard, past startled families eating dinner, over a low wall into a neighborhood mosque's courtyard. An elderly imam looked up from evening prayers, took one look at their desperate faces, and silently pointed toward a side gate. "This way," Amina gasped, pulling Amir through narrow passages only locals knew existed. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but Farz's face floated before her eyes. Her baby brother, who'd survived leukemia treatments, but wouldn't survive Hassan's revenge. They emerged onto a main street just as two armored vehicles screeched to a halt, disgorging men in tactical gear who moved with military precision. But these weren't Hassan's criminals. These were royal guards, and they surrounded Amir with a protective formation that made passing pedestrians stop and stare. "Your Highness," the lead guard said, his voice sharp with barely controlled panic. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine. The woman is under my protection. Arrest Hassan al-Khoury and everyone with him. Seize all electronics, lock down the restaurant, and get her brother, Farz Duarte, Muscat General Hospital, into protective custody immediately." Orders were barked into radios. More vehicles arrived, and suddenly Amina was standing in the center of a royal operation, watching this man she'd thought she knew transform into someone completely different. Amir stood taller, spoke with absolute authority, commanded instant obedience from men who would die for him without question. He was no longer the quiet observer in a corner booth. He was the sheikh, and the distance between them had never been more obvious. "Amina," he said softly, turning to her while guards created a perimeter, "I need you to trust me a little longer." Trust. The word felt like mockery after such thorough deception. But what choice did she have? They were taken to a secure facility, not a police station, but something more official, where serious men in expensive suits asked questions and recorded answers with digital precision. Amina's evidence was examined by forensic accountants who promised it was more than enough to ensure convictions. Hassan and his associates were already in custody, their operation dismantled in less than 3 hours. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Amina felt hollow. She sat in an elegant waiting room, drinking tea from porcelain cups she was afraid to break, while Amir spoke with council members in an adjacent office. Through the partially open door, she heard fragments of heated conversation. Words like negligence and oversight failure and immediate reforms. The sheikh she'd trusted with a desperate note was being held accountable for the monster he'd inadvertently funded. Part of her felt vindicated. Part of her just felt tired. When Amir finally emerged, his expression was carefully neutral. "Farz is safe. He's been moved to the Royal Hospital. Private room, best oncology team in the region. All expenses covered. You'll be provided security and—" "I don't want charity," Amina interrupted, her voice flat. "I wanted justice. And you'll have it. Hassan will be prosecuted. Everyone involved will face consequences. The entire foundation is being audited and restructured. You have my word." "Your word," she laughed bitterly. "How much is that worth when you spend days lying to me? When you let me pour out my desperation to someone I thought was just a regular person who might care?" Amir flinched as if she'd struck him. "I did care. I do care. That's why I came back. Why I listened. Why I'm here now, trying to make this right. You're here because you're embarrassed. Because your perfect foundation had rot at its core, and some poor American cleaner had to point it out. Amina stood, setting down the teacup with exaggerated care. Thank you for helping my brother, truly, but I'm done being your social project. She walked toward the door, but Amir's next words stopped her cold. I knew on the second day. Amina turned slowly. What? That you knew who I was. When you mentioned telling your brother about the mystery customer, I knew he would have looked me up. You're smart, Amina. Too smart not to recognize the air once you saw photos. But you kept treating me like Leo, the nobody in the corner booth. You chose to trust the man, not the title. Amina's breath caught. He was right. Fairs had found Amir's face in seconds. Royal websites and society pages confirming his identity. She'd seen the truth and decided to ignore it because the man who'd returned to that terrible table had treated her like a person worth listening to. The title didn't matter when respect did. Then why lie? She asked, her voice breaking. Why not just tell me? Because I wanted to earn your trust the way everyone should have to earn it. Through actions, not authority. And because for the first time in my life, someone was seeing me, not the crown. He stepped closer. No guards following, no protocol dictating his movements. Hassan will be convicted. The foundation is implementing new oversight. Every employee who was threatened or stolen from will receive restitution. But none of that matters if you walk away believing I did this out of guilt instead of what? Amir met her eyes with devastating honesty. Instead of realizing that the woman who risked everything to protect her brother and expose corruption is the bravest, most extraordinary person I've ever met. Instead of understanding that sitting in that corner booth, watching you refuse to let circumstances crush your dignity, taught me more about leadership than a lifetime of royal training. Instead of falling in love with you, somewhere between the note under the napkin and now, the silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither could ignore. Amina thought of Fairs in his hospital bed, safe for the first time in months. She thought of Hassan behind bars. She thought of all the employees who would sleep easier tonight because one woman had been reckless enough to trust a stranger with the truth. And she thought of Amir, the sheikh who'd disguised himself as ordinary to discover his own failures, who'd risked his reputation to protect people he'd never met, who'd stood beside her in an alley while criminals closed in, and never once suggested his title made him more valuable than her life. No more lies, she said finally, ever. No more lies, I promise. 6 months later, when Southern Roots reopened under new management with Amina as operations director, her hands that had scrubbed floors, now signing contracts and implementing policies, the corner booth remained permanently reserved. A small plaque explained it was a memorial to courage. To the night, a folded note became a revolution. And when Sheikh Amir bin Rashad proposed to Amina Duarte under desert stars, with Fairs grinning beside them in remission, he did so as the man who'd learned that real power comes not from crowns, but from choosing to see those the world has taught you to overlook. She said yes, not to royalty, but to the possibility that two people from impossible distances could build something real from shared truth and extraordinary courage.